The world wakes up to a headline splashed across newspapers and TV screens. The United States accuses Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro of drug trafficking. It sounds like the plot of a Hollywood crime thriller. The image painted is dramatic. A head of state sitting in a presidential palace, secretly coordinating with narco cartels, flooding American cities with cocaine. Washington pushes the story with full force. The Department of Justice releases indictments. Press conferences warn of danger. For many in the US, it feels like a moment of righteous justice. But for others, especially in Latin America, it feels familiar. Too familiar. Because this isn't the first time America has labeled a foreign leader as a criminal, a tyrant, or a danger to the world. Behind the loud accusations, there's a bigger question. Why Venezuela? And why now? The US claims it's about drugs, but history whispers a different story, one about oil, power, and control. To understand the storm, we need to go back to a country once known as the Jewel of South America. Venezuela wasn't always a land of crisis. In the 1970s and 80s, it was one of the richest nations on the continent. Oil money flowed freely, skyscrapers rose in Caracas, middle-class families lived comfortably, foreign investors poured in. At one point, Venezuela's capital was nicknamed the Miami of South America. But wealth built on oil is fragile. As prices crashed, poverty rose, inequality exploded. While a few elites lived in luxury, millions struggled to survive. Out of this frustration, a new figure emerged, Hugo Chávez. Chávez wasn't born into privilege. He was a soldier, a man of the people, who spoke with passion and anger about the poor being forgotten. In 1992, he attempted a coup against the government. It failed and he went to prison. But instead of silencing him, it turned him into a legend. When Chávez ran for president in 1998, he promised a revolution. He spoke directly to the poor, the workers, the farmers. His movement, called the Bolivarian Revolution, sought to reclaim Venezuela's resources for its people. Once in power, Chávez nationalized oil. The profits no longer flowed mainly to US companies. They funded schools, clinics, housing, and food programs. For the poor, he was a hero. For Washington, he was a nightmare. Because with Chávez, Venezuela stopped being just a supplier of cheap oil. It became a symbol of resistance to American dominance. When Chávez died in 2013, many thought his revolution would die too. His chosen successor, Nicolás Maduro, didn't have Chávez's charisma. He was quieter, less fiery, often underestimated. But Maduro did something unexpected. He held on. Even as Venezuela's economy collapsed, even as millions fled, even as the US applied crushing sanctions, Maduro refused to step aside. And he did more than that. He strengthened alliances with America's rivals. Russia sent military advisors. China invested billions. Iran supplied fuel when Venezuela's refineries broke down. Maduro made it clear he would not bow to Washington. That defiance only deepened the hostility. For the US, Maduro became more than just a local strongman. He became a symbol of foreign influence in America's own backyard. At the center of it all is one simple fact. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Iraq, more than Russia. This is the heart of the struggle. Whoever controls Venezuela's oil controls immense global power. For decades, the US enjoyed privileged access to Venezuelan crude. But when Chávez and Maduro nationalized it, when they turned to Russia and China instead of ExxonMobil and Chevron, the relationship broke. Suddenly, Venezuela wasn't just another oil supplier. It was an energy fortress aligned against Washington. And history shows when oil and defiance mix, conflict soon follows. Enter the US indictments. In 2020, the Department of Justice accused Maduro and top Venezuelan officials of running a narco-terrorism conspiracy. According to Washington, Maduro conspired with Colombia's FARC rebels to ship tons of cocaine into the United States. The charges carried up to 30 years in prison. The U.S. even offered a $15 million reward for information leading to Maduro's capture. It was a stunning move, accusing a sitting president of being a criminal kingpin, but critics immediately questioned the timing. Why would Maduro, who barely controls his collapsing economy, mastermind a global cocaine empire? Why did the accusations come right after Venezuela deepened its ties with Russia and Iran? For many analysts, the answer was clear. The drug charges weren't really about cocaine. They were about politics. And then came the warships. Shortly after the drug accusations, the U.S. announced it was sending naval destroyers, aircraft, and surveillance planes to the Caribbean. Officially, the mission was to fight drug trafficking. Unofficially, it was a clear message. We are watching you, Maduro. The sight of U.S. warships near Venezuelan waters evoked old memories. The days of gunboat diplomacy, the Cold War standoffs, the Cuban Missile Crisis. To Maduro and his supporters, it looked like intimidation. America flexing its muscles once again in Latin America. But the bigger question was, why now? The U.S. claimed moral high ground, but hypocrisy was everywhere. Washington accused Maduro of drugs, while close U.S. allies in Latin America faced similar allegations and remained untouched. Corruption, trafficking, human rights abuses, ignored as long as the government stayed aligned with U.S. policy. It wasn't about morality, it was about loyalty. And Venezuela, by choosing Moscow and Beijing over Washington, had crossed the line. While governments clash, it's the ordinary Venezuelans who suffer the most. Sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies were meant to punish Maduro and his inner circle. But the reality on the ground was very different. The restrictions cut Venezuela off from international banking, blocked its ability to sell oil freely, and strangled the flow of medicine, food, and fuel. In hospitals across Caracas, nurses reported shortages of basic supplies, syringes, gloves, even clean water. Parents searched desperately for antibiotics that no longer arrived on pharmacy shelves. In the countryside, farmers abandoned their fields as fertilizer imports vanished. Millions fled. By 2023, more than 7 million Venezuelans had left their homeland, the largest migration crisis in Latin American history. Families were torn apart. Many walked across borders into Colombia and Brazil. Others risked their lives at sea, trying to reach Caribbean islands. In the streets of Caracas, resentment brewed. Some blamed Maduro for corruption and mismanagement. Others pointed the finger at Washington, accusing it of using sanctions as a weapon to starve a nation into submission. Either way, the people, the very ones both governments claimed to protect, became the silent casualties of geopolitics. So why did the U.S. move so aggressively against Venezuela in recent years? Analysts point to three intertwined reasons. 1. Oil politics. The U.S. once depended heavily on Venezuelan crude. But as Venezuela turned toward Russia and China, Washington saw its energy dominance slipping away. In an age of global competition, letting rivals control the world's largest oil reserves was unthinkable. 2. Regional control. Since the 19th century, the U.S. has viewed Latin America as its backyard. The Monroe Doctrine declared the region off-limits to outside powers. But Maduro openly invited Russian bombers, Chinese investments, and Iranian tankers. For Washington, this was a direct challenge to its authority in the hemisphere. 3. Domestic politics. In American elections, Florida is crucial, and in Florida, Cuban and Venezuelan exiles form powerful voting blocs. Many fled socialism, and both Democrats and Republicans know that taking a hard line on Maduro plays well politically. The drug accusations, the warships, the sanctions, they all send a message not just to Caracas, but to Miami. When you put these reasons together, the narco-terrorism narrative starts to look less like a crime story and more like a geopolitical chess move. To really understand Venezuela's case, we must step back and look at history, because this isn't new. In 1989, the U.S. invaded Panama and arrested Manuel Noriega, accusing him of drug trafficking. In 2003, America invaded Iraq, claiming Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, claims that were later proven false. In 2011, NATO forces bombed Libya, insisting Muammar Gaddafi was threatening civilians. The country collapsed into chaos. Each time, accusations of crime or danger served as the moral justification for intervention. Each time, a foreign leader who defied Washington was removed. Venezuela fits the same pattern. The names and charges change: terrorism, drugs, corruption. But the script remains the same. Critics call it the old tricks of empire. But this time, something is different. When the U.S. moved against Panama, Iraq, and Libya, the world was largely unipolar. Washington stood at the top of global power. But in Venezuela, the situation is multipolar. Russia, China, and Iran openly back Maduro. Russia has flown military aircraft into Venezuela. China has invested billions in infrastructure. Iran has shipped fuel when no one else would. These allies aren't just symbolic, they complicate any potential U.S. military action. Venezuela becomes more than a national issue. It becomes a front line in the struggle for the future of global power. Will the 21st century remain American-led, or will rival powers carve out their own spheres of influence? To Maduro, the answer is clear. In speeches, he often says Venezuela is not just defending itself, it is defending the right of nations to resist U.S. domination. And so we arrive at the present moment. A Venezuelan president accused of drug trafficking, a U.S. Navy patrol in the Caribbean, millions displaced, sanctions biting deep. What happens next? Some believe the U.S. will eventually strike a deal. As global oil markets tighten, Washington quietly talks with Caracas about easing sanctions. The war in Ukraine makes Venezuelan crude more valuable than ever. Pragmatism may triumph over politics. Others fear escalation. That one misstep, a skirmish at sea, a clash at the border, could trigger a wider confrontation. But most Venezuelans simply want peace, stability, and dignity. They are tired of being pawns in a struggle between giants. As we close this story, one truth shines through the fog of propaganda and power. This was never just about drugs. It was about oil, control, and the enduring struggle between empire and independence. And that is the story. The Venezuelan president accused, the U.S. warships deployed, the people caught in between. A story not of crime, but of power, an old script rewritten for a new century. If this journey opened your eyes, don't forget to hit like, share this video with others, and subscribe to the channel for more stories the mainstream won't tell you. Because history isn't only what happened, it's what's happening right now.